Walk through any downtown district in Chicago, San Francisco, or even smaller towns in Ohio today, and you will notice a haunting shift in the atmosphere. It is not just that prices are higher, it is that the physical landscape of the United States is hollowing out. We are witnessing the great emptying of 2026. While the headlines scream about inflation, they are missing the darker reality visible on the streets. 15,000 retail stores boarded up in the last 12 months alone, office towers standing silent with 25% vacancy rates, and a record-breaking 1.5 million Americans now living without permanent shelter. This isn't just an economic dip. It is a structural collapse of the old American way of life. The country feels empty because the spaces that once defined American community, the mall, the office, the starter home, are disappearing before our eyes. To understand why the United States feels fundamentally different in 2026, one must first look at the physical erosion of the retail landscape. This phenomenon, often termed the retail apocalypse, has accelerated from a slow decline into a sudden cliff drop. Data from major retail analysts indicates that between late 2025 and the first month of 2026, major chains initiated the closure of over 15,000 individual storefronts. This is not merely a shift to online shopping. It is a liquidation of physical presence. Legacy brands that anchored American commerce for decades, Macy's, Foot Locker, and CVS, have slashed their footprints aggressively. In 2020, a dead mall was a novelty. In 2026, 1 in 4 malls in America is at risk of total closure. This creates commercial deserts, vast stretches of suburban landscape where the only lights on at night belong to automated distribution centers, not places where people gather. The emptiness is palpable because the third place, the sociological term for places that are neither work nor home, is vanishing. This physical emptiness of commercial zones is mirrored by the desolation in America's business districts. The return to office mandates of 2024 and 2025 largely failed to refill the skyscrapers of New York and Los Angeles to pre-pandemic levels. As of January 2026, commercial real estate vacancy rates in major metropolitan areas have stabilized at a staggering 20% to 25%, a figure that would have been considered catastrophic a decade ago. This is the urban doom loop in action. Fewer office workers mean fewer lunch spots, fewer dry cleaners, and fewer transit riders. The tax base of these cities crumbles, leading to cuts in sanitation and safety, which in turn drives more people away. The result is a downtown core that feels like a ghost town by 5 o'clock p.m. When viewers comment that their city feels empty or dangerous, they're reacting to this data point. The foot traffic that provides the eyes on the street safety mechanism has evaporated, leaving behind vacant canyons of glass and steel. However, the emptiness is not just commercial, it is residential, but in a cruel, paradoxical way. While storefronts sit empty, the demand for shelter has never been higher, yet the availability of affordable entry points has hit absolute zero. The U.S. housing market in 2026 is defined by a distinct lack of inventory for the working class, contrasted with a surplus of high-end units that sit vacant. Institutional investors now own a significant percentage of single-family starter homes in the Sunbelt states, removing them from the purchase market and turning them into permanent rentals. This creates a feeling of transience in neighborhoods. People don't know their neighbors because their neighbors are forced to move every 12 months when the lease renews at a higher rate. The emptiness here is the loss of community stability. The data supports this. The average tenure of a renter in a single-family home has dropped. While the vacancy rate for luxury apartments in cities like Austin and Miami hovers near 10%, creating ghost towers where units are owned as assets but rarely inhabited. The most visible and tragic symptom of this emptiness is the surge in homelessness, which reached a record high of 1.5 million people, according to the most recent Housing and Urban Development (HUD) snapshot. But the complexion of this crisis has changed in 2026. It is no longer just the visible encampments in city centers. It is the invisible homeless, the families living in vehicles, The emptiness of the American promise is felt most acutely in the parking lots of 24-hour box stores, which have become de facto campgrounds for the employed homeless. These are people with jobs, often working full-time, who simply cannot bridge the gap between wages and the median rent, which sits stubbornly above $2,000 in many major markets. When a society has nearly 1 million people locked out of the housing market, the social contract feels broken. The streets feel empty of compassion and full of despair, creating a psychological weight that every citizen feels when they commute. Compounding this sense of national fatigue is the aftermath of the recent 43-day government shutdown. This event, which concluded just recently, did more than just pause national parks and passport processing. It hollowed out trust in public institutions. During those 43 days, federal workers went without pay, contracts were paused, and small businesses, relying on government loans, were left in limbo. Economic analysts estimate this shutdown shaved 0.5% off the Q4 2025 GDP, but the psychological cost was higher. It reinforced the narrative that the system is gridlocked and broken. When citizens feel that their government is non-functional, a sense of national nihilism sets in, a feeling that nobody is at the wheel. This contributes to the atmosphere of emptiness. The public square feels devoid of leadership and direction. The collective anxiety of the nation spiked during this period, and although the government has reopened, the sense of security has not returned. Financial emptiness is the other side of this coin. The American savings account has been drained. During the pandemic years, the personal savings rate spiked, but by 2026, it has plummeted to near record lows. Credit card debt has ballooned past the $1.3 trillion mark, meaning the average consumer is fueling their lifestyle with high-interest debt. This creates a zombie consumer economy. People are still buying essentials, but the discretionary spending that fuels a vibrant economy, dining out, entertainment, travel, is drying up. Restaurants report that table covers are down, movie theaters are seeing record low attendance, and vacation bookings for the middle class have softened. The economy feels empty because the velocity of money has slowed down for the bottom 50% of earners. They are not participating in the economy. They are merely surviving it. When you walk through a mall and see few shoppers carrying bags, you are witnessing the visual representation of a depleted savings rate. The demographics of the United States are also contributing to this hollowing out. The birth rate has continued its downward trend, falling well below the replacement level of 2.1. In 2026, kindergartens in some districts are seeing shrinking class sizes, and maternity wards in rural hospitals are closing due to lack of demand. This is the gray emptiness. As the baby boomer generation enters advanced age and the younger generations delay or forego having children due to economic instability, the sound of America is changing. It is becoming quieter. The vibrant chaos of youth is being replaced by the silence of an aging population. Japan faced this decades ago, and now the U.S. is beginning to feel the early onset of demographic contraction. This manifests in labor shortages in service sectors, empty playgrounds, and a general sense that the future is shrinking rather than expanding. Furthermore, the emptiness is exacerbated by the digital migration of human interaction. In 2026, the metaverse and immersive digital spaces have not replaced reality, but they have sufficiently fractured attention. The third place has moved to a server. Young adults are statistically spending more time alone than any previous generation. The Surgeon General's advisory on the epidemic of loneliness is no longer just a warning, it is the lived reality. Bars, bowling alleys, and community centers, the physical brick-and-mortar locations of socialization, are closing because the patronage isn't there. When people describe the country as empty, they are often describing their own isolation. They drive from an automated garage to a cubicle or a home office and back, ordering food via an app, interacting with a screen rather than a human. The friction of daily life, which used to generate community, has been optimized away by technology, leaving a frictionless, lonely void in its wake. This isolation is geographically concentrated. We are seeing a sortation of America, where people are fleeing states with high costs of living and perceived social disorder. States like California and New York continue to see net out-migration, losing hundreds of thousands of tax-paying residents to states like Texas, Florida, and Tennessee. However, this leaves behind hollowed-out infrastructures. A city built for 8 million people feels eerie when it loses 5% of its population, particularly the wealthy tax base. The subways run less frequently, the trash piles up a bit longer, and the vibrancy dims. Conversely, the boom towns in the South are overwhelmed, creating a different kind of emptiness. The emptiness of infrastructure that cannot keep up, sprawling subdivisions without souls, roads without sidewalks, and cities that are merely collections of houses rather than communities. Both the shrinking cities and the sprawling boom towns suffer from a lack of place. The agricultural sector is also facing a literal emptying. The number of family farms in the U.S. has continued to plummet in 2026, as consolidation by megacorporations accelerates. Drive through the rural Midwest, and the emptiness is physical and vast. Small towns that once supported a local feed store, a diner, and a school are dissolving. The land is still there, productive and green, but it is managed by automated combines and GPS systems, not by families living on the land. The rural population drain has reached a critical tipping point where entire counties are struggling to maintain basic emergency services. This rural emptiness feeds into the national psyche. The heartland myth is being replaced by the reality of corporate monoculture and depopulation. Then there is the emptiness of the shelf. Supply chain disruptions have become a recurring feature of the 2020s, not a bug. In 2026, shoppers are accustomed to sporadic gaps in availability, certain medications, specific food items, or car parts being unavailable for weeks. This phenomenon, sometimes called Shelflation, where you pay the same for less availability, contributes to the feeling of a failing system. When a consumer walks into a pharmacy and sees empty rows behind the plexiglass, it triggers a survivalist anxiety. It signals that the abundance that characterized the American supermarket for 50 years is no longer guaranteed. It breaks the illusion of endless plenty and replaces it with a scarcity mindset. The gig economy has also hollowed out the traditional job market. By 2026, over 40% of the workforce is involved in some form of freelance or contract work. While this offers freedom, it strips away the workplace community. The empty office is not just about real estate, it is about the loss of mentorship, camaraderie, and the social safety net of a steady job. A freelancer working from a kitchen table is economically active but socially invisible. The labor market statistics might show low unemployment, but they mask the fragmentation of the workforce. We have an economy of individuals, not teams. This atomization of labor contributes to the sense that everyone is on their own, fighting for scraps in a lonely arena. Finally, we must address the emptiness of truth. In 2026, the information ecosystem is so flooded with AI-generated content, deepfakes, and algorithmic polarization that the shared reality of the country has fractured. There is no longer a national conversation because there is no single media hearth that Americans gather around. One half of the country believes the economy is recovering. The other half believes it is in a depression. This epistemological gap creates a silence between neighbors. People are afraid to talk politics or economics for fear of conflict, leading to a superficiality in public discourse. We talk about the weather because talking about the world is too dangerous. This silence is the sound of a polarized society retreating into its corners, leaving the center empty.